Hello. Have you been wondering why IFE, the Icelandic Confederation of Labour, called for a boycott of the new budget airline player? Well, let me explain this. So, the call for a boycott from ISE, um, they're basing it on two claims. The first claim is that the collective agreement that Play Air made with the union EFF, more about this union later, um, has lower wages uh, than similar collective agreements on the labor market, especially the one with Iceland Air. So the one that Iceland Air has with the pilots union and the flight attendants union. And that these wages are so low that they're even lower than unemployment benefits, like the lowest unemployment benefits. The second claim that they have is that this union, the EFF, the Icelandic Flugliðafélag, Íslenska Flugliðafélag, or Icelandic Flight Crew Union, that this union is the yellow union. Now, a yellow union is a union which is controlled by or even run by employers, and therefore does not actually represent the interest of the workers, but the interest of the employers. Now, the union is super interesting and it's super fun to talk about them, but I first want to talk about Play Air. So Play Air is a new budget airline, and it very much presents itself as the follow-up of WoW Air, WoW Air 2.0. We can have a long discussion about Icelandic culture and why it is effective advertisement in Iceland to present yourself as the follow-up airline of an airline that went spectacularly bankrupt. But, well, let's not go into this now. So, Play Air was founded by people who had been involved in WoW Air. They originally called themselves We Are Back, WAP. So, yes, very much. They present themselves as WoW Air 2.0. WoW Air, but not having to pay all the debts of WoW Air. Their business model is also very much the same business model that WoW Air had. That I just want to point this out, caused WoW Air to go bankrupt. But it's the same business model. So it is very much the typical business model of a budget airline. So, low prices, cutting costs wherever possible. And when they were trying to attract new investors, they told them that their wages are going to be even lower than they were with WoW Air. So 19% to 37% lower. And so newspapers had gotten hold of part of the collective agreement, and they agree with RC that the wages are very low in that agreement. Play Air is claiming that even though the base wages might be lower because of because the bonus system for Play Air works different than for Iceland Air, the actual real wage that people get out in the end of the month is going to be the same or higher. This was supposed to be a long part because I really wanted to look into it and do calculations and everything. But you cannot actually find the collective agreement anywhere online. So RSE had gotten a copy from I have no idea where. Some newspapers have gotten a copy from a source, and then obviously Play Air knows what the collective agreement is. So it's a lot of he said, she said, like Driva says it's low, Play Air says no, it's not. And then like newspapers who are more independent, I wouldn't call them completely independent in Iceland, looking at it and saying, oh yeah, that looks significantly lower than Iceland, yeah. But I mean, they did attract investors saying that the wages will be lower than WoW Air, which already was lower than Iceland Air. So RC seems to have a case there. Now, when I went looking for this collective agreement, I very quickly started looking into this union, the EFF. Originally, the Icelandic Pilots Union, not to be confused with the actual pilots union, Íslenska Flugmannafélag, was founded by WoW pilots when WoW was still alive. And the members only included the pilots of WoW, so it was a very, very small union. And then when WoW went bankrupt, because they are a small union, they actually basically said, we cannot help our members financially. So what happened is WoW went bankrupt spectacularly, was owing like several months of wages to the employees, and all the other unions, like there were some who were in Rough Air, like the people from the office. Then the flight attendants were in the flight attendant union. So all the other unions basically got together and said they're going to financially support the members who had just lost their job and missing several months of wages, because it takes so long in Iceland for a claim to be made to the wage guarantee fund, which is like the fund for wages if your employer goes bankrupt. And they basically like offered financial aid to members, but the EFF was like, well, we're small, we can't do that. And they seem to kind of be more concerned about like criticizing the bad press that WoW was getting than actually caring about, all their members who were losing wages. So after WoW went bankrupt, obviously like EFF lost all its members. There were only pilots who worked for WoW Air. No more WoW Air, no more members. And it basically became like a shell of a union. So at this point, as far as I could find out, they had a chairman and 2 board members. I don't think they ever had staff. More about this later. why I don't think they have staff. And well, obviously all their members had left. So this was the state the union was in when it started negotiating with Play Air. At this point, We Are Back. That was mid 2019. So while they were negotiating for the collective agreement for pilots, they extended their bylaws. They rewrote their bylaws to extend membership to flight attendants, but they did not have any flight attendants as members. They only said, we are a union for anyone in the flight crew. But the only members were the 3 board members, the chairman and the 2 board members. So no flight attendants or members, no flight attendants in any way involved in these negotiations. But this is when they then also started to negotiate a collective agreement for, other flight crew, which mainly is flight attendants. So of the 3 board members who were negotiating, they were all pilot, they were all male, they were negotiating for workers of a traditional female profession and deciding how many wages they deserve. There is a gender issue here. There is definitely like a wage equality gender issue here as well, and men deciding like women's wages. But of these 3 people, apparently 2 were already employed by Play Air at this point. So basically Play Air, which at this time did not have, they might have had like 1 airplane. I think they bought an airplane pretty early, but they had no flights. They had no scheduled flights. I mean, they started flying now, and this was in 2019, 2 years ago. But they already employed 2 pilots. And these 2 pilots were the 2 pilots who happened to also sit on the board of the union they were doing collective agreements with. And this is where I basically feel like, yes, the claim of it being a yellow union is true. mean, they were employed, they were getting paid by Play Air. Why making a collective agreement for workers that weren't even members at this point? Now, how is a collective agreement usually done? So usually, if you're in a normal union, when you're at a workplace that has more than 5 members of the same union, you get to vote for a representative. And this representative then sits on the Council of Representatives in the union, which usually meets like once a month and makes executive decisions. And then if there's time to negotiate a new collective agreement, this Council of Representatives votes for a negotiating committee, a committee which also consists of members working in that industry and in that profession. And then they basically set the demands, and they basically vote on whether or not whatever has been negotiated is good enough to be put towards a vote of membership. So usually there's negotiations, people say, okay, this might be an agreement, so the negotiating committee like votes and says, okay, we agree with this, we agree for this to be put forward in the process, and then the members get to vote. So you might remember that from 2019 when there was a huge strike that you voted on a collective agreement. You might remember last year, if you're working for the state or the city, there were a lot of agreements being made then that you voted for a collective agreement. But usually it is something the members get to vote on. But here there were no members. There were no members to vote on this. So basically, collective agreement was done completely with membership input, because the people who would be working under this collective agreement weren't in the union yet. And how this collective agreement is legal under Icelandic law, well, I'm actually not even wondering anymore. Because Icelandic labor law seems to be a joke. Like, how can this be legal? I keep wondering that at least once a month with Icelandic labor law. But apparently it's legal, because RSE is going the way of boycott and not the way of we're going to sue you. Or, well, at least the flight attendants union might have had like a reason to sue if they were excluded from the negotiations. But no, apparently this is not something you can sue on. Apparently this is all legal, even though it should be. This is not how a union is supposed to work. A union is supposed to represent its members and not like make an agreement with an employer to create membership that will then pay money to you. Need a break. I need more tea. So, other weird things about this union, because like it was so much fun to research, so I'm going to share all of it. So the first thing I did was find the name of the union and then put it into the website of the tax office, the company registry, because you can find all organizations there. And what I found out is, yes, it's registered as a union. The three, the chairman and the 2 board members that we have been talking about a lot are like registered as the real owners, which for whatever reason, 30% ownership, like in all other unions, the chairman is registered as a real owner with 0% ownership, but this union does whatever it wants. The address under which it is registered is the home address of the chairman, so no office, which is why I think there's no staff, because it doesn't have an office. It has no website, as I said before. I looked up in the address book, Yelp.is, where if it has an address, and there the address is a post box. So it's like literally like, like one of these, it's like one of these like post box of companies in Cayman Islands that you have for tax reasons just as a union. It's a post box union. I did not know this was possible. I think that's amazing. Do they have any kind of funds? Do they have a sickness fund? Do they have an education fund? Do they have no summer houses? Like, they have no summer houses. Like, the one thing that like seems to be like the main thing for unions to have, summer houses. They don't have it. So, and it is kind of concerning. They are not part of RSE because RSE has some standards whom they let into their organization. which is really, really bad for the flight attendants. I mean, the flight attendants are just like, they are just really being taken for a ride. I'm very hard trying to keep my swearing down, but yeah. Um, so the flight attendants who are in the flight attendant union, which is part of RSE. Usually, if you're in a union that's part of RSE and you move to a different union who is also part of RSE because of your job, you get to keep some of the earned rights. So if you've been paying into and you have like rights, like for example to the sickness fund, you get to transfer these to the new union as long as it's within the RSE. But because the EFF is not in RSE, it has like zero funds basically because it had no membership, like it didn't have time to build up funds. And you cannot even transfer your own funds. So yeah, any kind of benefits, other benefits you have other than representation, and I mean the EFF had no lawyer either. I don't even want to know what happens if you make a claim because of lost wages or something with them. Like anything unions usually do, this union does not have. Like I had to laugh because like we are not even registered as a union, and we are definitely like we're a bunch of volunteers. There's nothing professional about us, but we managed to have a website. We managed to have an address. We even managed to have a solidarity fund now. That's probably like has more money in it than any of the funds from the EFF. But yeah, so to use a very technical term, yes, this union is dodgy as fuck. And I can't believe that it's even allowed to exist, and I can't believe that any of this can happen in Iceland. I mean, I can believe it now, but the airline industry in any country, not only in Iceland, it's always a really convenient industry to experiment with union busting because it's international, it's volatile, profit margins are really slim, mass layoffs are common. Workers are usually not organized because usually there are a lot of workers in different countries. And I mean, we've seen that before. We've seen it with Iceland Air, where all the flight attendants were fired during negotiations. I put the link to the video below. We saw it with Blaufugl, the cargo airline, where all the wage-employed pilots were just fired and replaced by contractors who don't have a union. And this is just like the third way. Like we just make up our own yellow union. Play Air has been saying that they are being targeted unfairly by RSE. Because RSE they went pretty easy or did not have a very strong reaction in the end towards what was happening with Iceland Air when they fired the flight attendants. They basically ended up giving them a slap on the wrist. I mean, I don't think that the call to boycott is going to be in any way successful because Icelanders aren't going to give up cheap flight tickets out of this country after being stuck here for 2 years. And I kind of agree with them. Like RSE should have reacted way stronger when the things were happening with Iceland Air. But Iceland Air is like most of the pension funds, which are controlled by the unions, have invested into Iceland Air, so they have a vested interest for Iceland Air not to go bankrupt. Which says more about how the pension system is undermining the union system sometimes, rather than saying that RSE is targeting Play Air unfairly, because it's not unfair. I mean, it is just a way to try and undermine the union system and undermine how collective agreements are made. And yes, and the EFF is a joke. Yeah, this concludes this chapter of Let Me Explain This. The second part of the quality of life collective agreement video, it's still coming out. It's just boring, and I just don't feel like filming a lot of times these days because the weather is nice. Well, not today, but usually. Like this was lying around for 2 weeks until I got around filming it. My producer, who's not in the credits, who's going to be really disappointed because the audio quality is going to be shit. So the video quality is nice. I'm using my camera. Really wants this to be a podcast. I really don't want it to be a podcast. So that's a conflict we have to sort out. I'm sorry, Anna. I just don't like podcasts. But I hope that I can cooperate with her next time so that the audio quality can be better, because she has a better microphone. My microphone is shit. So I apologize about that. And yes, I see you next time, either at any event of ours. We're having a lot of these now, or maybe at a meeting, or well, if not, in the next video. Thank you for watching.